All right, well, it is a beautiful, sunny spring day here on the Daily Vape. I'm IndoorSmokers, your host, and it's been said that if we see so far today, it's only because we stand on the shoulders of giants. Today we're going to talk about a few of the biggest giants that have ever walked the earth. So it's been a couple of weeks and I've had a lot of people requesting I do another history lesson. So this is another one of my favorite topics. So today we're going to be looking at how with knowledge the world can be had and how without it, it can be lost. We're going to follow the path of Western civilization from the Roman Greco period through the Dark Ages and then back to the rediscovery and the rebirth, the Renaissance. So I know today we like to look at ourselves as the apex of human civilization, and we look back and we see things like chronologically everything coming to where we are today. Well, that wasn't the case throughout most of human history. Most people for the last couple of thousand years looked backwards to the apex of human civilization. They looked back to the Roman Greco period as being the height of human achievement, and everything had been downhill since then. And until the Renaissance, where we started turning that around, and basically with the rebirth of science, literature, art, culture, music, basically all of the things that we judge a great civilization by. Once we found a rediscovery and a rebirth of those things, now we are on the path that we're on into the modern period. So today the world is basically divided between two periods. We discuss everything historically as either being BC or AD, referring of course to the period of Christ. So we're looking at things that happened before Christ or after Christ. So we're basically looking at Christ as the great division in history, one great event where everything after that had been changed enough to where it can be referred to as after that event, and everything before that being before that event. But of course the people who existed before the event didn't know they were BC. There's a riddle about an archaeologist who finds a gold coin dated 34 BC, and the question is it real? So people debate about whether they had gold or whether they made coins at that date or whatever else. But of course the obvious answer is, how could you have a coin dated 34 BC? Because nobody knew they were BC. But anyways, my point being that prior to that division of Christ, there was another point that everybody before that had looked at as being the division, and that was the period of Socrates. Everything before him, even to this day, we call all of the philosophers before Socrates pre-Socratics. So the whole world had basically been divided into the pre-Socratic and the post-Socratic periods. So the important thing to note is the importance of Socrates himself as a character and a figure in history, but more importantly is the chain of students that led down from Socrates. Socrates tutoring Plato, Plato tutoring Aristotle, and then Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great, who would go on to conquer almost the entire known world at that time. Now Alexander the Great wasn't technically a Greek because he came from Macedonia, but like I said, that's beside the point. Basically, he was influenced by the Greek culture just like everybody was at that time. So Alexander the Great goes into Persia. Now we've already talked about the Persians and the 300 and what happened when the Persian Empire attempted to take over Greece. They actually did a couple of invasions. Neither one of them were any more successful. So that did inspire the Greeks to think, hell, look what's happened when the Persians have tried to come in and fuck with us up here. 300 of the Spartans could hold those sons of bitches off. Well, imagine what we could do if we went down in there and brought the shit to them. So Alexander was the first of the Greeks to go down and actually bring the war to the Persians. So Alexander the Great invades the Persian world and conquers it all the way down to India, basically. By doing so, he spreads the Greek culture all throughout the Persian Empire, and basically creating Hellenistic kingdoms and setting up cities where they had libraries and importing all of the great classical knowledge all the way down throughout the Persian world and down through India. So he unfortunately dies young in his early 30s, so he never really has a chance to establish a world empire. So it begins to quickly break down and crumble after he dies. But he still launches a 200-year Hellenistic period, which is the period that exists from the classic Greek period up until the conquest by Rome at about 150 BC. So you're talking about maybe a 150-year period where the entire world is influenced by Greek culture. This is one of the great advanced periods with art, literature, music, science, philosophy, mathematics. Everything at this point is like a heightened for world knowledge. So now even with the conquest of Rome, it doesn't really have that much impact, because Rome was great about adopting and integrating other cultures, religions, values from other societies, especially powerful societies with a lot to offer like the Greeks. So they incorporate a lot of that and themselves are influenced into their heyday of 500 years of the Roman Empire. So you're looking at almost a 1,000-year period from the beginning of the classical period in Greece all the way up to the end of the Roman Empire. This 1,000 years of being the height of human cultural existence, before and after, for a long time. But in the 5th century AD, finally after a 1,000-year reign by Rome, they break down and collapse. There's a lot of theories about why Rome ultimately collapses, but in the end they're ransacked. The Visigoths, the Vandals come in, different groups, tribal, barbarian groups basically by the Roman standards, because a lot of them, they weren't literate, come in, ransack Rome, and unfortunately don't appreciate or recognize the value of all of the knowledge of the classical period. So when Rome is ransacked and almost burned to the ground basically, and the Vandals and everyone loot, and of course that's where terms, you know, like vandalism comes from, what the Vandals did in Rome, and the Visigoths, of course that's where the Goth in that period. So that basically ushers in the Dark Ages, what we call the Dark Ages. Now of course we know they weren't as dark as we believed before, but you can also, they're also referred to as the Middle Ages or the medieval period. I always think medieval sounds the coolest. But this is a dark period in Western cultural existence. For almost 1,000 years you have no real advancements in science, in literature, in art, in culture, music, anything during this period. You basically, the world falls back into a feudal system where the church reigns supreme. So the fascinating thing about the Dark Ages is what brings them to an end. So you finally have in the 12th century, 13th century, the Great Crusades. You have about 3 major crusades that go through. The final ones I think are in like 1350s. During these crusades, you have a rediscovery, because now you have the Catholics basically funding massive invasions of the Muslim territories down through the Middle East under the guise of liberating Judea, Israel, you know, whatever, pretext basically, the same kind of shit. But anyways, we go down there, and guess what? Although Europe has lost all of this ancient Greek classical period knowledge and has been set and has sank basically into this dark ages of human existence, thank God there was some people in the world who hadn't forgotten all of this. And that was the entire Hellenistic world that Alexander the Great, 1,000 years earlier, more than 1,000 years earlier, had conquered and had introduced all of that Greek text and knowledge that had been saved. And there were actually huge libraries throughout the Persian world. And when the Crusades went down there, we rediscovered all of this ancient Greek classical period, Roman Greco, science, knowledge, philosophy, and Aristotle and Plato and Socrates were reintroduced to the Western world. And what comes after that? The Renaissance. That sparks the rebirth of Western civilization with the rediscovery of the same ancient Greeks, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. The same knowledge and thought that sparked Alexander the Great to conquer the world at that time would once again revitalize Western Europe to go out and conquer the freaking world again, where there was a time that the sun never set on the British Empire. And of course, through the advancements of science and technology, we're able to usher in the industrial age. And then of course that moves into the modern technological age and information ages that we have today. In many ways now, for the first time in human history, we have finally surpassed the achievements of the Roman Greco period, but still in some other aspects, maybe not. There was a time when they said that the classical period was like a shining light between 2 eternal darknesses. Well, that light was re-sparked again in the 15th century. But it doesn't mean it can't go out. Let's just hope there's not a third darkness coming. Alright guys, we'll see you tomorrow for our Topic Tuesday, and we will also be announcing the winner of that MVP Shine. See you then.